Hi, it's me again, Ray. Not with a ghost story this time, but, well, a kind of ghost story. You'll see what I mean. You'll see where the confusion comes in as I tell you the story. I knew a married couple many years ago. They'd been married well over 20 years, Brian and Jackie. Brian was heavily into sport. At the weekends, he was either playing golf, go to watch a football match, or both. Okay. Jackie was into gardening. She loved the garden. She was always out in the garden growing stuff and seeds and flowers and whatever she did. Gardening was her life. Sport was Brian's life. After, 20 something years of marriage, Jackie wanted a bigger garden. They had a big house. She didn't want a big house. There's only the two of them there. She wanted a big garden. Brian didn't want a big house or a big garden. He wanted a flat where he, just a flat where he could just sit there and watch sport on the telly, minimal amount of kind of work and maintenance. They split up. It was perfectly amicable. They split up, sold the house. Brian bought a flat, a one-bedroom flat, so he could then dedicate his life, basically apart from going to work, to sport. Jackie bought a smallish bungalow, but with a very big garden, huge garden. I remember she told me something like 200 feet long, the back garden. He was in his element, she was in her element. Excellent, perfect solution. Now, this tale, this story, this is as Jackie told it to me, okay? This is what she told me. I wasn't there, I wasn't in on any of this. Okay, so they parted, they were both happy. They kept in touch by phone. They didn't meet up, but they kept in touch by phone. It was about, she said to me, about 6 months later that Brian phoned her and suggested they meet up for a drink. Great, good idea, she thought. Yeah, no problem with that. He suggested that they meet up where they originally met 20-something years ago on the village green. He'd moved away, he'd moved into the local town. Jackie had stayed in the village where she bought this bungalow. On the village green there was a bench next to the cricket pavilion. Okay, and he said, why don't we meet there? Perhaps this Friday night, this coming Friday night, 7 o'clock. She agreed to that. I think this was earlier in the week or something, so they were going to meet on the Friday. She said to me that they'd met there originally. There was a fete or something on the village green, and she'd sat on this bench and he'd come across, and that's how they met and eventually married, of course. So great, she agreed to that. Yep, on the village green, they'd walk over to the local pub and have a drink, have a chat, just see how they're getting on, mull over old times or whatever. She did say there was no chance of going back together. He didn't want that, and neither did she. So that was it. She was looking forward to the Friday evening. On the Friday during the day, Jackie went into town to get a few bits and pieces, and she bumped in an old friend, Pamela. Now, Pamela knew Brian and Jackie. She'd known them for quite some time, apparently. And Pamela said, oh, hello, I'm so sorry to hear about Brian. So Jackie's saying, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? Brian, everyone knew that they'd split up. It wasn't a secret or anything like that. And Pamela said, his heart attack. Of course, Jackie was shocked. A heart attack? When? I'm meant to be meeting him tonight. This Pamela said that it was the other day before, or whenever it was the other day, had a heart attack. And, it was terrible news sort of thing. And she was surprised that Jackie didn't know. Of course, this was the days before mobile phones. Word didn't get round as it does now with Facebook, Twitter, mobile phones, messaging. Everyone knows kind of 5 minutes before something's happened that something's happened. So she said, oh, yeah, I better go and see him. What hospital is he in? Because she said he'd gone to the hospital. And Pamela said, no, you misunderstand me. Brian's dead. Of course, Jackie was just devastated. Dead? She said, yes, apparently he went to hospital and had this heart attack and he's dead. Jackie said to me that she went home, spent most of the afternoon just sitting there, tearful, devastated, just, absolutely, completely, utterly devastated. That evening she wandered down to the village green where they were supposed to meet. She sat on the bench, just trying to take in all that had happened, and just couldn't believe it. And she said that the clock struck, I think it was the church clock struck 7, or a clock somewhere, struck 7 o'clock. And she happened to notice someone walking towards her across the village green. And as this person got closer and closer, she saw that it was Brian. And I'm dreaming. She said to me, I thought I was dreaming. And then there's Brian saying, hi, hello, as he's walking towards her. He walked up to her. She was just frozen to the bench. She said she couldn't move, speak, just stared at him, completely frozen. After she said what seemed like ages, probably only a few seconds, she managed to stand up, and she blurted out, "But you're dead." And apparently he laughed. "You're dead? What do you mean?" He's looking up. "I'm here." "What are you talking about, dead?" "Yeah, I'm here." And she flung her arms around him, and she couldn't believe that he was there. And I mean, this is why I say this isn't a ghost story. You know what I'm going to say, don't you? You know how this ends. But it is food for thought. It's very interesting. So they sat on the bench, and she said, you had a heart attack. Pamela told me that you'd gone into the hospital and you died. Now, this Pamela, Jackie said that she'd always, they're friends of them both, but she was always been after Brian. She was always jealous of Jackie. She wanted Brian, and I mean, nothing ever happened, but there was always this kind of problem, this issue that they had. And she said to Brian, "I reckon that Pamela made it up." Awful thing to do, dreadfully spiteful thing to do, but that's the only answer. And he said, "Well, no, I did have a heart attack." Then he said, "Well, it's probably more of a heart murmur." And he said he was out with a friend, a chap from work, and he'd had this heart problem. His friend called an ambulance, and Brian ended up in the hospital. And she said, "Well, so was it a heart attack or not?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. It was some kind of murmur." He said, "They put me on, in intensive care on this bed thing." And, he talked to her quite openly about it all. He said, "I had pipes and tubes and wires all connected to me." And she said, "Well, so how come they've let you go?" He said, "Well, they discharged me." She said, "Yeah, but after something like that, surely they'd keep you in for observation for a while." And he said, "Well, I was there for hours." He said, I suppose that was enough." He said a nurse eventually came up to him, a young nurse came up to him. She'd taken all the pipes and tubes off, and she said, "That's it, you can go home now." Now, Jackie said to me that she still found all this rather odd, at least keep him in overnight. Okay, there's a shortage of beds and the rest of it, as we know with hospitals, but she was surprised that they didn't keep him in. And she said, "Well, why didn't you phone me, when you got home? Why didn't you phone me?" He said, "Well, I waited for you." And she said, "What do you mean, waited for me?" He said, "Well, I waited at home for you. You didn't come home at all. Where were you last night?" And she said, "I was at home." She's getting really confused. And then she thought, well, hang on, he's confused. And she wondered whether whatever problems he'd had with his heart, whether it had left him, confused mentally, and he just didn't seem to know what was going on. And she said, we live apart. Why? What do you mean you waited at home for me? I wouldn't go to your flat." And he said, "No, the house. I waited at the house for you. You didn't come home all night." And she sort of questioned him a little bit more about this. And he said, "Oh, you've moved all the furniture, everything's different. And who are those people there?" And she said, "They're the people we sold the house to. We sold the house 6 months ago." And he said, "Well, they didn't speak to me. I asked them where you were and who they were. They didn't even acknowledge me." And she said to me that's when she realised that possibly he was dead. She was talking to whatever it was, some kind of image, memory, or even ghost of her husband. She just didn't know what to think. She said he was completely confused, and now so was she. He went on to say to her, he said, I forget her exact words, but something like, "I feel lost. I feel completely lost." I don't know what to do or where I'm supposed to go. So she didn't want to say, well, I think you're dead. So she said, well, go home to your flat. She said, well, sit here for a while, go home to your flat. I'll come with you and make sure you're okay. And he said, oh, I want to go home to the house. Jackie had always been interested in spiritual stuff, psychic stuff. She had books on it. She used to read a lot about it. And that is why she wasn't... that's why she had the idea that he might be dead. Normally you wouldn't think that you're chatting to someone. You wouldn't think, oh, they're probably dead. You wouldn't normally think that. But she read a lot and learned a lot about all this sort of thing. She questioned him further. She said, well, where have you been? He said, well, wandering about. He said, I don't quite know where I'm supposed to be going, what I'm supposed to be doing. And she said, okay, mentally he appeared to be, well, he was totally confused. But she said physically, he looked really well. I remember her saying that he'd never looked better. He really did look well and healthy. Which again, she thought perhaps fitted in with, I don't know, he was the image of him now free of all ills and stuff like that. Not that he was ill when he'd had this heart problem. Anyway, she said, look, I think what you better do is just sit here, just relax. She held his hand, just relax and try to let go. Apparently he said, well, let go of what? What do you mean, let go? And she said, well, I think that you're kind of stuck here. Try to let go. Just try to let your mind free and drift away. And he said, well, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do, but all right. And he just sat there, he didn't speak, until he happened to look up like that, and he pointed across the green and he shouted out, Dad! Apparently his father had died some years previously. Jackie looked across the green. She said she couldn't see anything, there was nothing there, no one there at all. Brian was smiling. In fact, she said he had a big grin on his face as he was looking, and he did this again, smiling. He got up from where he'd been sitting with her. He stood up and he turned, and apparently he said to her, he just smiled and said, thank you. She didn't say anything because she wondered what was going on. Well, she had an idea, obviously, he'd seen his dad. He then said, goodbye. And she just said goodbye. He turned, walked across the green, only a few steps, and then just dematerialised, faded away, gone. There was a little bit more to it when Jackie told me the story. It was years ago she told me, so I can't remember all of it. But that's basically what happened. Jackie told me that she went to the hospital trying to find this nurse that had said, you can go home now. She did manage to track her down. She spoke to the nurse, only a young nurse, and the nurse said, whenever anyone passes, whenever they pass over, when they die, she said, I always say to them, that's it, you can go home now. So that explained that. That's why he thought that he'd heard that, he'd definitely heard that. He thought that was it, I can go home. He got up, in his mind, I suppose, not in his body, he got up and left. As I said, not a ghost story so much, but food for thought. It's just something that I've wondered, ever since she told me that, I've wondered when I'm chatting to someone, wherever it might be, I sometimes think, are you actually here or are you dead? I don't know. Food for thought. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.